How's it going, folks? Welcome to the video. If you're not one of my regular viewers, not that I have regular viewers, then hi, my name is Luke, I'm 24, I'm an English teacher from Ireland, and I'm currently living in the Philippines, but I'll be moving to Japan very soon, where I'll be making my first ever foray into full-time employment, working as a teacher, teaching children in Tokyo. So that's me, that's who I am, let's get into the video. Just really quickly, I want to say I kind of, treaded the line of making a very clickbaity title, and I typically don't like to do that. I want to say really quickly that this isn't like a life hack, and it's certainly not one of those sort of like typical internet spammy things that claims to be able to teach you like a language like in 7 days or something like that, but all it in fact really does is make you part with your money. This is just more of a lesson in perspective. I do have a master's degree in teaching English as a foreign language, but I'm never going to claim to be an expert in language teaching. I'm also especially not that experienced. This is just an observation that I've made through, time spent living abroad, learning foreign languages, and being a language teacher. One of the first questions you get asked when you start a course like TESOL or TEFL or ELT or something like that is, what is language? And it's just designed to make you realize how language works, but also how language came about. Language is, in many ways, a tool. It is like, sort of the shortest route between, 2 points, like an as the crow flies means of transmitting information. I need to tell you something, you need to learn something, I'm going to use a method of communication to give you that information, and it's got to be as efficient as possible so that you understand it, that we save time, and that we can communicate, we can have an understanding between one another, and all that sort of stuff. Language, as well, depending on how you look at it and how you're willing to look at it, is also, to me, a game. Now, why do I call it a game? Let's try something. I want you to think of one sentence that you know in a foreign language that you don't know very much of. Take the sentence, maybe write it down or just think about it if you want to, and try to see how many other sentences you can make by jumbling up the words or by taking out some words and adding in new ones that you also happen to know. See how many sentences you can do. I think you'll find that you can do quite a bit more than you realized. A good language teacher will tell you that you know more language than you think you know. It's not because you know hundreds of words and you've somehow forgotten them. It's actually because if you're clever enough and willing to sacrifice accuracy for fluency, that you can actually construct quite a bit more sentences than you think you can. I should clarify, the difference between fluency and accuracy is grammatical correctness and whatnot. A fluency sort of oriented language lesson is one where people focus on communication and saying stuff and trying to spend as much time speaking the new language as possible, whereas accuracy more focuses on like short bites of language and getting it perfect. It's the difference between, imagine if your student says, "I go bank later." What they mean is, I'm going to the bank later. You understand that because you speak English fluently, and that's enough information for the student to have conveyed their meaning perfectly. However, it's not grammatically correct. If it was a fluency-orientated lesson, that would be fine, because the student has been practicing the language, they've transmitted the information they wanted to get across, and that's good. That's successful communication. It's not perfect communication, but it's still time spent speaking in the foreign language, and meaning is still happening, communication is still happening, and that's good. From there, we can obviously work on refining that, and that's also sort of a secondary aim. In an accuracy-oriented lesson, we would take that sentence and we would say, is this correct? Is "I go bank later" correct? And we would look at the words that the student is omitting and get them, on the right track towards saying it with, proper grammar and whatnot. So if you really think about it, if you're willing to, accept that maybe you might sound a bit silly trying to cannibalize what little grammar you know, what little vocabulary you know, to reorient it and make new sentences, you can still pretty effectively make yourself understood to somebody who speaks the foreign language you're trying to speak in, if you just, you try to make what you know work in different scenarios and you play with the language. I'm going to give you an example from something that happened to me a year ago, or like a year and a half ago, when I was living in China. So more than a year and a half ago, I was living in China with my ex-girlfriend, and we, obviously because she's my ex, had some differences. For example, I liked to go to the gym, but she didn't. So before I went to the gym for the first time by myself, I asked her to teach me a phrase so I could ask for help if I needed it. The likely scenario being I tried to bench press too much weight and it landed on my chest and I couldn't get it off and I needed help. She taught me how to say, 不好意思,可以帮我吗? Which I'm hoping is decent Mandarin pronunciation. It means, excuse me, can you help me? The idea was that I would just use this to get somebody's attention in the gym if I needed help and then get that help off the person. So one day, anyway, I was coming home from the gym and it started raining. I was about maybe 5 minutes from home. It wasn't a big deal for me and I don't mind getting wet, so I just kept on walking. But I happened upon this young guy. He was trying to carry a very large TV up a hill by himself. I stopped him and, before I stopped him, I thought in my mind, okay, I'm going to ask him if I can help him. But how do I do that? So I thought about the phrase that I know, or that I learned just there in, Chinese, how to ask for some help, and I looked at the words and I was like, bong, that's like help. And I know that wo is me and ni is you, so I looked at the guy and I was like, wo bong ni, which is close enough to I help you, that he understood that I was going to help him. So he stopped and he let me pick up the other side of the TV and together we carried it up the hill to his car. He probably thought I sounded a bit bizarre, but like, who cares? I was able to help him and I was able to convey roughly what I wanted to say and he understood me and I was able to help him and to communicate with him. In that scenario, I was aware of that. I was aware that I probably sounded quite silly asking the sentence in the manner that I asked it, but at the same time I was willing to put that aside to look silly, to help him, but also to practice the language and to see if I could really do that, to communicate meaning using a new sentence that I'd never used before, but by using existing vocabulary. And that's generally what I'm like when I'm learning a new language. I like to sometimes go out by myself without any help from anybody, and to see if I can use words that I know, and then maybe some gestures or body language to get the task done, to have the person I'm speaking to understand me effectively. I don't know if that makes me a particularly good language learner or just a very annoying language learner when I'm, encountered by people out in the world who have to then try and figure out what I mean. But it's fun, and it is a different approach to language learning that's, separate from just sitting in a classroom or sitting in front of a computer screen and having somebody recite to you. I'm learning Japanese at the moment, and I think I'm doing pretty well because I'm basing it off all the Chinese that I knew and that I learned specifically to just get around, learning as I needed to based on necessity and vocabulary that I needed to use all the time, as opposed to just like, the sorts of stuff that you encounter in language lessons that isn't necessarily always relevant to the scenarios you might find yourself in. Essentially, in summary, the most effective way to learn any language is first to figure out what you need to know, and then start playing with what you then learned to see what you can turn it into. Language is a tool. It can be used, it can be played with like any sort of game in order to produce new things and new results, and ultimately understanding is something that people work on. Even if you share a language, you'll still find yourself in some scenarios where you have to try things differently, use a different approach to saying what you want to say, and at the end of the day, it will never be perfect. Language is never perfect, and the way you use language is never perfect, but by, putting aside self-consciousness and maybe sounding a bit silly, the fear that you sound a bit silly at first, you can explore language, you can play with it, you can take it apart and rearrange it, and you can achieve more effective communication and, improve vastly as a language learner by being willing to play. So guys, that's the video. I hope you had a reasonably good time. Thoughts and thoughts. If you want to add to the discussion down below or debunk me entirely, do so down below. I'm willing to be argued with or proved wrong. It's totally fine. I am a language learner myself and a student of teaching language. I'm not an expert, not in any way, shape, or form, so do feel free to, take my argument apart or whatever. That'd be cool. Anyway, you can find me on Tumblr, Twitter, Instagram at Duketastic. But otherwise, as always, just take care. Forgot my little announcement. I got my form back from my employer regarding my immigration into Japan. It was accepted, so I am now officially moving to Japan. Before I was kind of tentative, now it's confirmed. I have been accepted by Japan. Yay!